Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin, a special edition. We're going to go through the 30-year history of the Democrat Party's effort to destroy the judicial confirmation process and address its latest victim. I said victim, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. So we're going to start right away. It started in 1987 on the floor of the United States Senate by Ted Kennedy. Go.
Mr. Bork subsequently retracted the most Neanderthal of these views on civil rights and the First Amendment. But his mindset is no less ominous today. Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back alley abortions, blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters, rogue police could break down citizens' doors in midnight raids, and school children could not be taught about evolution. Writers and artists would be censured at the whim of government. And the doors of the federal courts would be shut on the fingers of millions of citizens for whom the judiciary is and is often the only protector of the individual rights that are the heart of our democracy. America is a better and freer nation than Robert Bork thinks. Yet in the current delicate balance of the Supreme Court, his rigid ideology will tip the scales of justice against the kind of country America is and ought to be. The damage that President Reagan...
That's enough for Mr. Chappaquiddick. The attack, the smear, the character assassination on Judge Robert Bork, one of the smartest lawyers ever, one of the greatest professors ever, a tremendous circuit court judge, just smeared on the floor of the United States Senate. This began the process where Kennedy, Joe Biden, Dick Durbin, Patrick Leahy, and others, many of whom are still around, serving in the Senate, unleashed this unprecedented, historically unprecedented attack on a nominee. And they weren't done. A few years later, after the hearings were done in the Clarence Thomas case, they struck again with Anita Hill. And here's what Clarence Thomas had to say about that at the time. Go.
Unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her.
Now let's stop right there. Notice, America, the Democrats today keep talking about old white men who dared to raise questions, that is, Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, about the latest accuser. Well, there's Clarence Thomas. He's no old white man. He's a young African-American, 1991, during his confirmation, questioned by old liberal white men, set up to be smeared and destroyed. Go ahead.
And I think, more important point, I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think that this hearing should never occur in America. This is a case in which this sleaze, this dirt, was searched for by staffers of members of this committee, was then leaked to the media, and this committee and this body validated it and displayed it at prime time over our entire nation. How would any member on this committee, any person in this room, or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion?
All right. And he went on to call it a high-tech lynching, which is exactly what it is. There was a piece by the late, great columnist Robert Novak. We'll call those first two Exhibit 1 and 2. Here's Exhibit 3. And it was at CNN. And he wrote, Washington, the Democratic filibuster against judicial nominee Miguel Estrada has little to do with the 41-year-old Honduran immigrant. What does this have to do with anything? Well, this is a piece written in 2003. That was 1991. It continues. It is part of a grand design to talk to death a succession of conservative judges selected by George Bush. So this is subsequent to Bork and Thomas. Democrats are intent on keeping the Senate from voting on any appellate nominations that do not meet the party's specifications. The extraordinary design, without precedent in 2 centuries of judicial nominations, was launched January 30th, 2003 in the office of Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle. Present were Assistant Leader Harry Reid and 6 Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats. With all pledged to secrecy, the fateful decision was made to filibuster Estrada's nomination, and you'll know why in a moment. And that was only the beginning. One Judiciary Committee member there was Senator Edward M. Kennedy, the Senate's liberal lion. In private conversations with Daschle and in Democratic caucuses, Kennedy has pressed a plan to prevent President Bush from putting his ideological stamp on the federal bench. As Republicans returned this week from recess, they had no immediate response to this threat. Internal Senate sources depict a Senate minority on an audacious mission. Rare use of the filibuster to keep a judicial nominee off the bench is only the tip of the iceberg. Multiple filibusters would generate the first full-scale effort in American history to prevent a president from picking the federal judges he wants. At the January 30 meeting in Daschle's office, the 8 senators agreeing to filibuster the Estrada nomination did not discuss his merits or demerits as a nominee for the District of Columbia Appeals Court, second in importance only to the U.S. Supreme Court. Rather, the objections to Estrada were political and procedural. His confirmation, they agreed, would set a precedent that appellate nominees need not answer detailed questions and would make it hard to stop him as a possible future Supreme Court nominee. The senators talked about slowing down a Bush assembly line of conservative nominees and cited support from an energized Democratic base. Well, let's take a look at some of these internal memos that were publicly released. You heard Patrick Leahy, the senator from Vermont, going on and on a few weeks ago. They stole our memos. They stole our memos. What happened was the Democrats and the Republicans put their data on the same site, and the Republicans saw it. Now, I didn't steal anything, but these are in Men in Black, my first book, as they were publicly made at the time. The reason they're furious about the public revelation of these memos, because it shows the sleazy, outrageous activity of the Democrats in the Senate and on the Senate Judiciary Committee to try and destroy the reputations and careers of nominees who are not progressives, who are constitutional originalists. Now, keep in mind, that's what's going on here. As I've said before, progressivism and constitutionalism do not work together because the progressive model is to destroy the constitutional model. And for the left, the Supreme Court isn't a court. It's in many ways a Politburo, and they insist on controlling the Politburo. Why? Well, Woodrow Wilson tells us why, one of the first so-called progressive intellects. What did he say? He said, we must control the courts, and they shall control the future society. And in effect, they must rewrite the Constitution. That's what's going on here. The Democrats don't mind a quota of 3, maybe 4 constitutionalists on the court, but that's it. That's their holy grail. They will destroy anybody, any human being, who dares to say that I will uphold the Constitution, because that is what they don't want. Here are some of the internal memos. You can see June 21, 2002, to Senator Kennedy, Schumer, Durbin, Cantwell, and its strategy of judges. In addition, you can see timing of hearings. The consensus is to make Priscilla Owen, who is a nominee to a circuit court, the big fight for July 18th. And they go through. Miguel Estrada will be more difficult to defeat given the sparseness of his record. Next. Another one, July 18th, Priscilla Owen again, Miguel Estrada again. They have a real hate-on for Estrada. You're about to find out why in a moment. Senator Leahy took the important first step of asking for memoranda that Estrada produced while working at the Solicitor General's office. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice has refused to turn over the memos. That has been the historic position of the Department of Justice, because the Solicitor's Office is the office that advocates on behalf of the federal government, and it's work product. It's attorney work product. It's not turned over to the United States Senate during a confirmation process. Next. Here you can see again, April 17, 2007, Elaine Jones would like the committee to hold off Now, first of all, before we go on, look who's in these meetings. Elaine Jones of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in 2002. She's in there, as well as a bunch of other left-wing groups. These left-wing groups are controlling the judicial nomination process for the Democrats. Kennedy, Leahy, Daschle, the rest of them, meeting with these groups, taking orders from these groups, conspiring with these groups, organizing with these groups in the shadows, where the American people can't see them. Next. Meeting with civil rights leaders, that is left-wing groups, to discuss judicial nomination strategy. June 5, 2002, to discuss all these nominees from George Bush. Next. Meeting with civil rights leaders, again, November 6. This goes back to 2001. The groups would like to postpone action on these nominees until next year, when presumably the public will be more tolerant of partisan dissent. Who are these groups? Again, you have People for the American Way, Ralph Nays, Kate Michelton, NARAL, Nan Aaron, Alliance for Justice, Wade Henderson, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, Leslie Prohl, NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the American Association of University of Women, and it goes on and on. Hardcore left-wing groups. Next. Here we have another meeting. This one was November 7, 2001. Check it out. They also identified Miguel Estrada as especially dangerous because he has a minimal paper trail, he is Latino, and the White House seems to be grooming him for a Supreme Court appointment. In other words, you gotta kill off this guy because he's Latino, he's smart, he's in the solicitor's office at the Department of Justice, he doesn't have a long paper trail that we can use against him, and if he gets on the D.C. Circuit, he may wind up on the Supreme Court as the first Latino Supreme Court justice. Incredible. Next. Kennedy behind the whole thing. Biden, Leahy, Durbin, and the rest. Next. Again, you can see who was in attendance. Daschle, Reid. And what are they focused on? Feinstein, Schumer, Edwards, Durbin, Leahy. Estrada. They got to kill off Estrada, the first Latino that might be on the Supreme Court. Next. Well, you get the picture. And that's what these memos show. They show that the Democrat Party has hijacked the judicial nomination process over the last 30 years. That their left-wing groups have hijacked the judicial nomination process from the American people. And they may let a justice through here and there who's nominated by a Republican, but the fact of the matter is they are going to crush anybody who they believe might change the balance of power. What are we talking about here? We're talking about Republican presidents like Donald Trump who are nominating people who want to follow the Constitution, people who want to adhere to the Constitution. Now, the left talks about judicial precedent. You got to follow judicial precedent. They don't mean it. If there's judicial precedent they don't agree with, they blow it off. But if they're right, judicial precedent, Dred Scott, the slavery case, do they think that judicial precedent should have been followed? Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Do they think that judicial precedent should have been followed? Korematsu, the FDR case, Japanese Americans, internment camps. Do they think that judicial precedent should have been followed? Brown versus Board of Education reversed. Plessy versus Ferguson. They embraced Brown versus Board of Education, as do I. But if they hadn't applied the Constitution, that court, we'd still have Plessy versus Ferguson. I've got a lot more. But first, I want to remind you, check us out on Levin TV at crtv.com/Mark, crtv.com/Mark. 3 to 4 times a week, you can catch my show there, and we hope you'll join us and all the other wonderful hosts there, too. Or call us at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV.